Hi everybody. Today we're going to talk about how we paint hardwoods. Specifically in this lecture we're going to talk about painting oak. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to lay down our base color. And then we have to let that dry. We need to let it cure so we can work on top of it. The next step is we're going to take our 1-inch fitch. And what we're going to do with that is we're going to start to lay in the grain lines. It's always helpful if you have a piece of oak in front of you so you can see what the grain lines do, or if you're working from a painter's elevation, the scenic designer will have provided for you what the grain looks like. As we lay in the grain, as we demonstrate here with the fitch, you'll notice that you want the brush sort of flat against the canvas or the surface as opposed to straight up and down. And when we paint in the grain, what we want to do is we want to sort of feather our brush back and forth as we go. And what that will do is that will create some softer edges, not so hard. If you look at the grain line that we have painted here in front of us, what you'll see there are a lot of holidays. There's soft edges, there's spaces. It's not just a straight hard line that's been painted with the brush just pressed down. You want to kind of lay it flat, feather it back and forth, and create this nice soft texture. You can see we've gone ahead and with our cooking show magic, laid in the rest of the grain. The next step is we're going to take a wash, and the wash is the same color as the grain, but it's very, very thin down. It's very, very translucent. And the idea is that what we're going to do is we're going to use that in various applications and layers to build up different colors in the wood and create some variation. We're going to look for areas between the grain. It's pointed out here with these arrows. And what we're going to do is we're going to take our fitch and that very thin wash, and we're going to lay some color in each of those areas. And what we want to do is maybe use 1 or 2 layers in one area and a few layers in a different area, or 4 or 5 layers in another area. So rather than a single uniform color between our grain lines, we get a whole bunch of different colors. We need to then let that dry completely. It has to cure. Remember that when we thin a paint down to make a wash out of it, to make it translucent, that we're also thinning down the binder. So if you don't let that fully cure, what's going to happen is you'll pull that up in the next step. The next step is we're going to do what's called spatter and drag, and this is going to create all of those small little grain lines between the major grain lines. So unlike when we spattered in the past, where we laid our flat on the floor and we stood up, we were a good 3 or 4 feet away. In this instance, we're going to have just a very little tiny bit of paint on the end of our brush, and we're going to only be about a foot away, or maybe even less, from the board, and we're going to very lightly spatter, so we want little tiny drops. This is a very quick process. We want to go ahead and spatter very quickly over the whole board, and then we're going to take that brush, and very much like when we dry brushed, we're going to then drag across the spatter that we just did in a single direction in a straight line down the length of the board. And what this does is pull those little dots out and create all that fine, beautiful little grain work that happens between the large painted grain. Finally, as we look at our board, if we find some areas that look like they're a little light and maybe didn't get enough spatter and drag, the nice thing about this technique is that we can always go back in and do any of these steps again. So we can add a little bit more texture in with the wash, so it looks a little bit, we can darken any of the light areas, and then we can also do a little additional spatter and drag if we want to create some more of those fine grain lines. And we end up with is a beautiful looking piece of oak. We can also add to the depth of the board, the look of the board, by using either a satin or maybe even a semi-gloss polyurethane on top of it. Please consult with your lighting designer first, and that will add some depth to everything. Thanks.